Something curious you'll notice if you research thoroughly about World War II is that the defensive machine guns of the bombers, both on the Axis and Allied side, stopped using tracer ammunition in their ammunition belts. All this in the middle of the conflict, which is extremely curious, since the use of tracer ammunition was already a standard at that time, basically because of how extremely useful they were. However, through trial and error, it was shown that they were extremely ineffective in the air, causing many problems for the bombers that used them. The defensive gunners of the bombers had at their disposal several types of ammunition identified by the color of the tips. The red ones were the tracers. These are ammunitions that primarily serve to leave a trail of red or yellow light that was made by the deflagration of a pyrotechnic mixture contained inside the projectile. This mixture was initiated with the extracted propellant charge, and it burned as it continued its trajectory. Although the mixture occupied a large part of the projectile, it was still capable of having significant stopping power and penetration, although obviously these characteristics were greatly reduced. As you can see in this photo of a British de Havilland Mosquito, its brightness was very visible even during the day. The Browning M2 ammunition belts included these rounds, generally every 4 or 5, with a range of about 1,300 meters, beyond which they no longer left a light trail. Despite being fired every 5 or so rounds, its trail allowed you to constantly see where you were shooting. This method allowed for correcting projectile trajectories while shooting. It perfectly complemented bomber aiming systems. In the air, shooting was necessary, hundreds of meters away, and also the only way to see if your projectiles were going to the enemy plane was when they hit it. So you had no way of knowing if the burst you were shooting was near or far from the target. So the traces at first were crucial for the defensive gunners. They were even extremely useful to know where the enemies were according to where their companions were shooting. With this in mind, why on earth then did they stop using tracers in bombers, being on paper extremely useful in and much more in the air? As we well know, the machine guns par excellence used for the anti-aircraft role were the effective and reliable Browning 22 caliber 50. In World War II, this machine gun had a variety of 4 different types of ammunition to fire. Since it was belt-fed, soldiers could assemble their own belts, allowing them to mix ammunition as needed. Typically, these belts came pre-assembled in their boxes with a combination for each role. For the defensive gunners, it was 1 tracer for every 4 anti-material rounds. These were the ammunition boxes used by the gunners, from where, if we are observant, we can see a lot of information about the ammunition they used, for example, its composition, 4 armor-piercing and 1 tracer, as well as whether the belt was already pre-assembled, or also the amount of ammunition that the box brought. As we can see in the bombers throughout the entire conflict, belts with tracer ammunition combinations were used to accurately see the projectile's trajectory and were included in the gunners' belts, but also to instill fear in the attackers and prevent them from approaching the bombers. We will see later that this was rather counterproductive, but we know thanks to declassified documents related to the bombers that participated in the Germany campaign that tracer ammunition had stopped being used in 50 caliber machine guns, consisting of the belts used by these in only armor-piercing ammunition or combinations with incendiary ammunition. According to the document, no tracer bullets were used in aerial machine guns by either the Allies or Germans by the end of the conflict. This tells us that the Germans also realized the problems caused by tracer ammunition. The reason for all this trouble is quite curious, and it is mainly because, despite their function was to provide an additional method of aiming, these greatly reduced the gunner's accuracy. Tracers caused optical anomalies. They altered the gunner's perspective regarding the fired burst, making the trajectory not 100% towards the enemies. The trace made by the tracers was not 100% straight, being affected by the movement of the bomber as well as by the wind, so they did not serve to identify the trajectory of the projectiles, causing many confusions. On the ground, this problem was not as noticeable since it was usually fired from fixed positions, or if the firing position was moving, it was at a very low speed. In addition, the targets usually did not exceed 200 meters in distance. However, the defensive gunners of the bombers had to fire at planes flying at 350 kilometers per hour. and at 7,000 meters high with a lot of vibration and also with strong gusts of wind, adding a lot of variability that apparently affected tracer ammunition considerably. In addition, the flashes caused by these when leaving the cannon caused a lot of visual noise, which caused fatigue in the gunner, as we can see in this document from the United States Air Force for 1943. This was already a proven problem. The Allies implemented the solution for this problem, and it was simply to remove the tracers from their ammunition belts, and instead improve the training of the gunners. Particularly, these were taught deflection aiming methods. As you will see, the particular shooting conditions of the bombers caused very strange physical phenomena every time they fired their machine gun, but the new aiming methods took all of this into account. For example, if you saw a fighter approaching from the side of the bomber, where would you shoot to bring it down? Logically, I suppose you would shoot ahead of the fighter, since it is in motion. So by the time the ammunition reaches the fighter, they can hit it without problems. However, this would basically just cause the projectiles to miss, going even ahead of the fighter. Instead, in deflection aiming, what they did was aim behind the fighter. This way, the speed of the bomber was taken into account, causing the projectiles to effectively hit the enemy. By 1943, tracers were no longer being used, so this method was extremely useful for shooting down more planes and better protecting the bombers. It was partially more effective than using tracers. By not using these ammunitions, the firepower of the machine guns even increased by 20%, because this time they had an extra ammunition in the belts every 5 normal ammunitions, which used to be an incendiary or anti-material ammunition. The incendiaries would be widely useful against Japanese planes because they were usually very prone to burning due to not having mostly self-sealing fuel tanks and also did not have considerable armor. The tracers not only had the disadvantage of being inaccurate, they also caused a concealment problem. Automatically, when firing a machine gun with tracers, the enemies instantly detected the bombers, both on the ground and in the air. In interrogations of German pilots who were shot down behind enemy lines and were subsequently captured, they assured that the tracers allowed them to observe the better defended bomber groups. In addition, it allowed them to know where the gunners were shooting to quickly approach from blind spots. For all these factors, they opted directly not to use any type of tracer in the bombers, and instead use quite curious aiming methods such as deflection. Although it seems insignificant to stop using tracers in the bombers, considerably increased the survival of this small change that almost cost nothing monetarily, saved the Allies billions of dollars in bombers,